to be really, really short. So I'm sharing my screen with you now. If you can't see it, let me know. Okay, so last lesson we talked about primary market research and secondary market research. We talked about the methods of each. We talked about focus group, observation, test marketing, and also consumer surveys, which entailed 3 types. Doing direct interviews with people face-to-face, or sending them a post through mail service, or doing the same thing but using online service for the survey. We talked about the limitation of each. Make sure you know all of them, especially focus group and interview. Today, we are going to go back a page and talk about the advantages and disadvantages, or benefits and limitations, of primary market research and secondary market research. What could you gain from each one, or what could you lose from each one? Most businesses, in order to maximize the benefit from both, they will do both altogether. But knowing that there is a resource restraint, businesses could be forced to choose one of these two. So either primary or secondary. So the benefit is from primary, which was a research. So you have to remind yourself about what primary and secondary were in order to understand the benefits of each. But primary quickly was to do the research yourself for the purpose of the business. So anything you do now would be up to date, which is good for this reason. The market changes all the time. You already know this from section 1. So any information that you might get from secondary sources could be formulated or gathered for a certain circumstance. And that circumstance could have changed by now. So that information, which means that information does not fit your purpose. So being up to date is very good. Make sure to talk about how the environment, the business environment change. When I say this, let me remind you quickly about what I mean about the market environment changing. Well, politically, there could be changes in tax system. There could be changes in interest system. Economically, people's income could have changed. People's taste and fashion and so on could change. Technology could change. So all these changes make the business environment nowadays very, very volatile. So again, your information being up to date and new is very important. The data you gather would be relevant to the purpose of your business. I want to know, for example, how many customers my business will have for this product. If your product is new and does not exist currently in the market, you relying on primary market research would be vital, because finding secondary information could not be relevant to your business. True that it could be similar. You might gain ideas about how your product is going to perform relevant to other products, but it's not entirely relevant. So the information you get might not be completely accurate. Okay. Third one of the benefits would be that it's not available to others. By others, I mean competitors. So you will gain an edge over your competitors. You have information that they don't have, and you might use that information for your business in order to make it special. Which means you gain competitive advantage over the others. So that's ultimately will increase your sales and profit, and will result in you gaining a really good brand image as well. Okay. On the other side, limitations is that it's costly for reasons you already know. Let me remind you quickly, you have to have people who do the research for you. Let me give you the example of conducting a survey. Think about all the resources, physical resources that you need, like paper, like brochures, if you have to make them. And also, it's time consuming. Why it's time consuming? Because it's a research that you have to conduct yourself. It's not currently available. So gathering the data, it might be a focus group, it might be a survey, it might be an observation. It takes time. And also doing analysis for the information, compiling all that raw data into data that you can look at and understand. So the presentation of it, which we will talk about later, is time consuming as well. And lastly, you could have the problem of bias, especially when you conduct an interview. The interviewee could give you answers that is not completely honest. So it's not their opinion. We talked about that in the limitations of conducting an interview. And also during the collection of sample, which we will talk about later as well, sampling, you could choose people who are will never be a consumer of your product, or they have not tested or seen your product before, but you've included them in your research, okay? So the way we do the sampling will determine whether the data we have is accurate or not. We call that bias, okay? Bias is any opinion that is not completely honest. And again, it's a limitation of interview, which is a method of primary market research. Okay, what about secondary market research? Well, it's cheap. Why is it cheap? Because it's already available. You can go online like this guy is doing and just gather the data that you have, or you can go to a library, a public library, and read books about, to get secondary market information. Also, it's easier to conduct and it's quicker. Again, for the same reason. These are self-evident reasons. It's quicker because it's already available, it's already analyzed, and conclusions have already made about the people. So it's quicker. Why it being quick and easy and cheap good? For obvious reasons. Well, being quick saves you time. So you can launch your product quickly and not wait until a competitor maybe launches the same or a similar product into the market. Remember, gaining market leadership is really important. Like what Tesla has currently. They have a market leadership in electric cars. Why? Because they're the first business who launched it. So anybody who would follow would not have the same customer base. You usually trust businesses that were pioneer in making that product. Apple would be another really good example. Samsung would be another really good example. What about the limitations? It's not up to date, as opposed to primary market research, which was up to date. It's not entirely relevant, and it's not maybe not completely reliable or useful as well. Remember, for the same reason, it's not conducted or compiled by you. It's done by other business for other purposes. Again. Okay, so if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we are going to go to sampling. Okay, so what is sampling? Well, if you go to your book, if you have the book, you should, and go to page 159, then you find this yellow square, Explore. This is a business conducting a research for, not a business, this is you conducting a market research in order to find out how students do their things. For example, going to the shop at the school, I think, or what method of travel they use to school to get to school and so on. So what I want you to do, not now, is to read this later on in order to understand why doing sampling is important. Let me tell you just quickly. Well, how many students do we have in our school? Maybe hundreds, right? So think about going to each individual student and ask them in an interview questions. Or even if it's not an interview and you're just giving them a questionnaire, a piece of paper with questions on them, like the one you have in this case study, in this story, then it will take a lot of time and it would be very, very, very expensive. So have this image and then translate it into huge businesses who have millions of consumers and customers. That could not be done. It's not a realistic approach to your market research. It will definitely make it more accurate. So the more people you include in your research, the more accurate the data would be, obviously. But for resource restrictions, as I said, you have to pick people from your population. Okay, so this picture that we have here is some methods of sampling. Listen, guys, you don't have to know in detail how they're different. It's just mentioned in your book. So this is AS and A level, what the difference between the sampling methods are. Just know that in simple random sampling, we just go and randomly pick people. So in your school, you just walk in the corridor, you turn and see somebody, you just go approach them and say, how about you become part of my research? There is no criteria to it. So you don't look at their age, you don't look at their gender, you don't look at any criteria whatsoever. You just pick them randomly. Okay, so that's one thing you could do in order to do sampling. Obviously, it wouldn't be as accurate because the ones that you pick randomly could end up not being a future consumer of your product at all, or somebody who's not interested in your product or business at all. So this problem is solved by systematic sampling and stratified sampling. These are methods which consider those criteria in choosing the samples. So they would look at people's age. Some business might have equal gender potential consumers. For example, how many males would buy the product would be equal to how many females would buy the product. So what they do is to use this systematic approach and pick a female and a male. So they make sure that there's 50-50 percentages of male and female participants in their research. That could be done as well. Stratified would be, you pick somebody from a group. So you store samples according to their income, maybe their age, maybe their culture, and so on. And you pick few people from those groups. Same thing for cluster. Okay, as I said, you don't have to know the detail of these methods, but that's how it's done. Okay, in general, why do we have to do sampling? As I said, because it's too expensive and time consuming. But the accuracy depends on how small the sample is. If it's too small, then you wouldn't be accurate, or you chose the wrong method. And the example I just gave you would be a really good one. There's no way children could buy your product, but they're part of your sample because you use random sampling. Or there is no way people who make less than $1,000 a month would buy your product because your product is expensive, but you did include them in your sample. That's what sampling bias is. It would make your data less accurate. Or going back to the school example, if the primary children are not allowed to go to the shop to buy their snacks and it's provided for them by the school for whatever reason, maybe it's not healthy for children to buy the snacks from the shop, but you did include them in your school research, then that would make that research inaccurate. If you come to me and provide that data to me as your boss or as your teacher, I would say no to that data. Go back and fix it because it would make your research conclusion inaccurate. Okay, so we are done with sampling. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, let's go to what makes research inaccurate in addition to these two reasons related to sampling. Well, we talked about the first one. Second one, we talked about it as well. Inaccurate interview response, them not being honest. So all the limitations of the methods we talked about, basically. The way the questions are asked. Let me give you an example to the third one, to the third problem of inaccuracy. Well, if I come to you, a random guy, and ask you, how much money do you make? Um, some people, they might be shy, or they wouldn't want to disclose any personal information. It's just personal. Why are you asking about my salary? Something that Kurdish people do all the time, which is not nice. You don't ask people how much money they make. It would make them uncomfortable. So it's a social mishap, if you will. So if you ask that question in that way, phrase it that way, you would force people to lie. Most people. I'll tell you, I make $2,000. There's no cost on me, so whatever. But look at how I can gain the same information from you by rephrasing my question. How about if I ask the question this way? How much, okay, what is the range of your salary? Now I'll give you options to them. It's from 0 to 500, and then 500 to 1,000, 1,000 to 2, 2 to 4, for example. And you just pick a range. Let's say you pick 1,000 to 2,000. You didn't tell me directly how much money you make, but now I have an idea about how much money you make, right? And you just encourage people to give you honest responses to your questions. So that was the third point. Fourth is related to language unclarity. Most of these are related to interviews. What do I mean by language unclarity? If I have a really thick accent and it would result in people not understanding me clearly, that's a language unclarity. Some people are shy, reluctant to ask for explanation again. So they would just answer based on what their conclusion was of what your question was, right? Just to be nice. Just imagine in a 5-minute conversation, I ask you 10 times to repeat your question. After a while, I just give up and just make up my own answers to questions that were not asked, let's say. Okay, data is out of date, talked about it already. Irrelevant data, talked about it already. Okay, so here I have an example to how businesses have lost millions of dollars as a result of ending up with inaccurate data. It might have been due to any of these reasons that Coca-Cola has failed to increase their sales by launching a new product. You don't remember this, I don't remember this, but back in the 80s, Coca-Cola actually changed the content of their Coke. That like the flavor was, they made it different. Okay, there was basically more sugar in it. When they conducted the research to find out whether people liked the new flavor, most people liked it. They used test marketing, I think, and focus group. So what they did was to give the participants a Coke, the new Coke, and ask them, and the old one. So it's just two samples of the two different Cokes. The participants were not told which one is which. And most people responded that they liked the new one. Okay, Coca-Cola goes about making a conclusion that people like the new flavor. So they launched it. They made the new Coke. It was a failure. Most people liked the old one, not the new one. So they lost a lot of money. That all came from inaccurate market research. Why? Because they ignored how loyal people were. People were comfortable with not knowing the new flavor, but when they were told it was new, then they were kind of mad. You know, I was loyal to the old Coke. Things are changing, so maybe that was one of the reasons. Okay, so you can find other examples online about businesses that used inaccurate data. Ford launched a car which they thought people liked, and the data they collected gave them that idea. But when they actually launched it, turned out it wasn't really good. Okay, so we are talking about millions of dollars of loss as a result of inaccurate market research data. So it's not a simple matter for businesses. All right, lastly, so you did the research, you collected the data, it's in its raw form. So you have all these numbers jumbled in. You look at them and it's all numbers. You can't make any conclusions about them. You can't see them to understand them. So you have to change that raw data into a more presentable set of data. What I mean by that is that when you look at them, you can make conclusions about them. So one form is to use bar charts like this. Another one is line graphs. This one is pictogram, or you could, order them in a table. Now I can see what the data mean. It's more presentable. First one, so this one shows intensity. The higher the line, the bigger that set of data is. For example, how many people liked the color orange? That column is higher. That means, and it corresponds to an axis, which tells you what the number is, right? Now I can color code them and understand them better. Can't, these are for, I don't know what the products are. Let's say, okay, it's a car. Can't, the blue one. So most people in 2020 increased their liking for Kent. Desire for Lincoln went down. So you can compare it to the years and you can see how your cells are changing basically. Some disadvantages are mentioned. Number one for bar charts is that when you have too many of these columns and they're really all close, you can't just distinguish by looking at them which one is higher and which one is not. For this example, it's easy, but for huge data sets, they might not be as clear because their columns and how high they are is all close to each other. That's one disadvantage. By the way, I forgot to include pie charts. I hope you all know what a pie chart is. It's just like a pizza with slices. The bigger the slice, the higher that set of data. What else? What else? When I go to pictogram, it's not completely clear what the exact number is. For example, one picture means what? 1, 2, or 3. For huge numbers, like if you have points, it's a fraction, let's say. How do you make that fraction using a picture? So it's usually used for very simple sets of data, not big ones. Businesses, I would say, wouldn't rely on this one. For tables, you have the disadvantage of the data not being very presentable itself. It's not very clear. So you have to study it and look at the numbers and compare it to the females and males. This one is 6, this one is 4, so males is higher. So there's a study involved that you have to do. What else? What else? You know how line charts work. For example, this shows intensity throughout the years or days or weeks. For example, you want to count your push-ups during the quarantine. On Sunday, you did 25. On Monday, you did 15. Now, by looking at the data, there's this steep decrease in your push-ups. So you go about increasing it again. So it shows how the data is changing. This one is really important for businesses because we want to compare our own current performance with the all performance or past performance. So that's useful in that way. Okay, sometimes using line graphs could be tricky because you don't know which point corresponds to which number, so you have to draw lines. Some people make mistakes. I'm sure that in your math lessons you've made that mistake. It's not completely accurate when you place the lines, when you extend them. So that's one disadvantage. So I would encourage you to read the disadvantages and the problems that you face using one of these ways of presenting your data. Okay, so we're done for today as well. You have end of chapter questions. Next lesson, we are going to go to chapter 12. And maybe go back to the questions for this chapter as well. So no homework, just another day of relaxing. Okay.